Good morning. Been a little behind on videos lately, but this week we're going to cover what I read in March. Total of 8 books for nonfiction, for fiction. Let's start with fiction. First up, Liberty's Daughter by Naomi Kritzer. Oh, man, my light's so bright it's hard to actually give you the covers here. No, that's the best you're going to get. Liberty's Daughter, Naomi Kritzer. It follows Beck Garrison, who is kidnapped by her father to live on a techno-libertarian seastead. Yeah, you read that right. We get to follow Beck as she reunites with her mother, which she thought was dead, because her dad said that. And she finds stuff for people, because it's so hard to get stuff imported or brought in from the mainland. So she finds stuff that people don't want, and basically gets trades. That's her job. Beck's at the center of a quest for power over the seastead, while her father is part of the group that is looking to build a virus that all the little workers that happily keep the seastead running at poverty wages for the rich people will keep doing it because they'll get, what comes out to be called the worker virus, which gets them to do their jobs, but actually has a lot of bad side effects too. So I found the story compelling, if a little bit fast. I would have enjoyed a little bit more time spent on developing the world and some of the characters. Not a bad story by any means, but it just felt like we could have gone just a little level deeper sometimes into the people and into the stories that are being told there. Next up, Sunlit Man, Brandon Sanderson. So this is, I think, the 4th book in his Secret Books projects. I have most of his books behind me, and I quite like them. This one opens up by following Nomad. This is not his given name in other books, although there's some very early hints that you've met this character before if you've read other Cosmere novels. Nomad is deposited while being on the run on a world that has such intense sunlight and such a short rotation cycle and high energy needs that people are staked to the ground as sacrifices so that their souls can be harvested later as a power source. So this gets into some of the previous lore from the Cosmere novels where your soul has power in it, or where the sprites listening to some other novels have power in them. So your soul is infused by the sunlight in some ways to create a power core. So it took me a while to figure out exactly who Nomad was, and when I realized I needed to read Dawn Shard again to put that part of Brandon Sanderson's world back in my head and just understand some of the backstory to it. As with every Sanderson book I've read, this is a great story in the fantasy genre. I felt there was good character development in it. It's a good world. There's some good triumph in it. There's some learning in it, and I liked it. So yeah, highly recommended. Next up, Beneath the God's Tree by S. Keith. The second book I read by this author. I read my first book by this author in February, and I enjoyed it. I found some of the dialogue a bit strained. I'd say that again about this book. Some of the dialogue is not quite there. Feels like it could go just a little better, but by no means not a bad book. This book steps back to a time that we was referred to in the development of the character Tanos in the first book I read. So we follow Tanos as there's a lost love and on a big adventure, really. Now it's implied this is lost love in the other book. The love is not lost currently in Beneath the God's Tree. Here we get to see Tanos operate away from his people, because he is often sent off away from his people for things. Doesn't necessarily say why, but to understand what's going on around him. On his mission to keep them safe from the bigger world and ultimately this world doesn't care that they live, really, what he has found out. If I have one criticism to the book, it's the same as the other one by S. Keith. Some of the dialogue is just a bit lacking. It's not crazy bad, but it feels like it just misses a beat. It just needs like a little bit more development to be believable. Despite that, I have 2 more books from this author that I'm looking forward to reading. And finally, Heaven's River by Dennis E. Taylor. This is, again, it just came out, and I listened to the other 3 books in this series on Audible last month, or in February, because I really wanted to dive in and see what was there. So Heaven's River is the 4th book in the Bobiverse series. Here we follow some of the Bobs as they travel to find a lost friend that disappeared earlier in the series. The entire Bobiverse series has been excellent as it asks really what counts as life. Is it just human bodies we now know, or does it encompass the digital people that exist in the future? Now there is, I forget what it's called, but like techno-futurists to be like, oh, we can't do anything now that might affect the hundreds of thousands of souls in the future. Definitely don't fall on that side, but it's an interesting question about what is life and humanity. So how should we treat this other species that are out there? Should they be allowed to flourish if that means less interstellar real estate for humans? It asks some good questions here, and it gets into some interesting science as well around artificial intelligence. So I've listened to these as audiobooks so far, but I really think that I want to buy the physical copies because I really like them. Next up, Dark PR. Now I got to guess disclaimer, Grant actually sent me this book. I made some post online about, boy, I don't know if I can get this in my library. and he offered to send it to me. So thank you, Grant. I really enjoyed this book as much as you can enjoy a book about that looks at how corporations are using media to frame the world in a way that advantages them and ultimately uses up resources and takes advantage of all the people around them. So if you can enjoy a book like that, it's going to frustrate you. It's going to show you in some ways how bad much of society is, how bad much of what we believe is true is, and how it advantages corporations and their profits, then by all means, this is a good book. Yeah, it talks about road safety. It talks about the climate crisis. It talks about our food supply and how corporations use marketing to frame the story so that, we have a personal carbon footprint and it's our fault. We need to do better, despite the fact that, corporations do like the vast majority of all the carbon emissions and all the carbon pollution in the world. It's the personal people. Again, talks about food supply, how fat is, just inevitable. It doesn't have anything to do with our food supply. It does have something to do with our food supply. So I've often used mental models to help me make sense of some of these ideas. I'm also now going to be adding Grant's frames to this, and I've certainly used them already in some of the further reading I have done and how things are framing, just to understand, what a corporation may be doing about it. Next, Ruined by Reading. Oh, such a bright book. Ruined by Reading by Lynn Sharon Schwartz. It's a very different book than I expected. In fact, a few pages in, I wasn't sure that I was going to be reading the book. I just thought I'd be putting it down and taking it to these bookstore for credit. But the deeper I got, the more thought-provoking the questions were that the book had me pondering. Some of them were, is reading too much a handicap because you never leave your mind free from others' thoughts? So when do you actually have time to think for yourself if you're just reading books? Being loud is not a sign of strength. It's another one that got me to think about the strength of character is shown by those that can quietly be unmoved in the face of the loud. How often do we just listen to someone because they are loud? I think that's something happens in society quite regularly. Are our pleasures, once sanctioned, less desirable? Another thought that it got me thinking about. Overall, I recommend this book. I think there's some good thoughts in there, some good life questions to ask yourself. Next up, Never Enough by Jennifer Brenny Wallace. Borrowed this from the library, so I don't have my copy here right now. This book takes a critical look at the achievement culture pushed on teenagers today, specifically teenagers with parents that can afford to get them into the best schools or send them to many activities so that their college university applications look the most appealing. So this is again looking at the affluent side of achievement culture. Unsurprisingly, this push to perform harms kids in many ways just as much as poverty harms kids that are barely getting by. And this comes down to scarcity. There's scarcity of time and there's scarcity of emotional support in many ways. And it comes down to, with kids in poverty, it's a similar idea as scarcity of resources, though, in this case. If there's one takeaway from parents, make sure that your kids know they matter to you regardless of how well they perform in school or sports. They should matter to you just because they exist. If you have other kids in your orbit, such as because you're a coach or a mentor, make sure that these kids know they matter without reservations as well. It's not just based on their performance. Finally, Everything and Less by Mark McGurl, another library book. Everything and Less is an academic look at how Amazon has shaped the way literature is written. Specifically, this looks at what academics call literature instead of genre fiction. I mostly read genre fiction. Most of us would normally be reading this, really, genre fiction. While I enjoyed the information, I'm sure there is much more depth to be had by someone who understands all the literature that they've referred to. I haven't read most of the books they talked about, so I just didn't get it. As it stands, this is kind of a maybe read. The book's not bad, but you need to be into an academic discussion on the topic of literature and how Amazon has affected literature and publishing. If you're looking more for a book that deals with the economic impact of Amazon on the publishing industry, then Book Wars is a better one, which I have talked about before and is linked in the article. That's it. 8 books in February? March. 8 books in March. Actually, in April, we're partway through, and I am vastly behind that. But, it doesn't actually matter. You should read what you read. If you have any other books that you think I would like based on these ones and what I liked so far, by all means, leave them in the comments. Have an awesome day.